It all started when I saw strangers walking around my farm. Worried, I called my son. His response was a punch in the stomach, cold and direct. Oh, I sold it, bought a beach house for my in-laws. Bye. And he hung up on me. What that greedy fool didn't know was that the farm, which he sold for a fraction of its value, hid a secret that his grandfather had buried there. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Now, he's the one calling me non-stop. He's on his knees, begging. My name is Helena, and at 68, I thought I knew every form of silence life had to offer. I knew the silence of a country dawn, when the dew still rests on the sagebrush, and the world seems to hold its breath, waiting for the first ray of sun. I knew the respectful silence that settled over the house after my Anthony passed, 2 years ago, a quiet filled with longing, but also with peace. On that Monday morning, however, I was introduced to a new kind of silence, the one that comes just after the world falls apart. It all began, ironically, with a deafening noise. The deep rumble of heavy engines tore through the peace of my kitchen, a strange and aggressive sound that didn't belong to the gentle melody of the plains. The smell of diesel and dust invaded the air, overpowering the familiar aroma of the coffee I was brewing, a sacred ritual that connected me to every morning I had lived here. Through the window over the porcelain sink, my hands knew as well as the lines on my own skin. I saw the scene that began my nightmare. Rugged trucks with mud-caked tires were parked on the dirt road, leading to the main gate. Men in yellow hard hats and uniforms walked across my land, our land, with clipboards in hand and an arrogance that hurt the eyes. They pointed, they measured, they drove colored stakes into the soil that Anthony and I had loved and cultivated for 40 years. Every gesture was a desecration. My heart, a tired old drum, began to beat unevenly, a rhythm of panic that rose in my throat. I dropped my coffee mug, which shattered on the floor, and ran to the porch, the cool morning air hitting me like a slap. "What are you doing?" My voice came out weaker than I intended, trembling. What do you think you're doing on my property?" An older man, maybe the foreman, approached with a constrained air, removing his hard hat in a gesture of belated respect. He showed me a folder with documents. "Ma'am, sorry for the disturbance. We're just doing the initial survey for the new owner." His words hung in the air, senseless. "New owner," I repeated, a hollow whisper. "There must be some mistake. This ranch is mine." He avoided my gaze, which only deepened my despair. "The work order's been signed, ma'am. The sale was finalized yesterday." With hands that trembled in a way I couldn't control, I went back inside and grabbed the old wall-mounted phone. I dialed the number for my son, Richard. Each ring was a hammer blow to my chest. When he finally answered, his voice was distant, irritated, as if I were interrupting him. "Mom, is something wrong?" "I'm in the middle of something." I took a deep breath, trying to find my footing. "Richard, there are men here. They're saying the ranch has been sold." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a loaded silence. "Mom, I was going to call you. I need to tell you something." His voice changed, adopting a falsely calm tone, the one he used as a boy when trying to talk his way out of some mischief. "I sold the ranch yesterday. It was the best decision for all of us. Believe me." The world around me began to spin slowly. The kitchen, my safe harbor for 4 decades, suddenly felt like a strange movie set. The ranch where every fruit tree was planted by my hands, where the laughter of family holidays still echoed on the porch, where Anthony's ashes were scattered under the old cottonwood tree. Sold, as if it were a soulless object, an inconvenience. "You have until Friday to be out," he continued, his voice now cold, practical, like a stranger's. "The new owners want to take possession quickly. I've already found a small apartment in town for you. It'll be better. Mom, you'll have neighbors. You won't be so isolated." The phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. Outside, The men continued their work, indifferent to my pain, cataloging the end of my life as if it were just numbers on a spreadsheet. I had 4 days to erase 40 years. The next 2 days dragged on in a haze of disbelief. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching the furniture, the walls, as if trying to memorize the texture of every inch of my life before it dissolved. Every object I picked up to pack was a knife twisting a little deeper in my chest. The rocking chair on the porch, where Anthony and I had spent so many evenings watching the sunset, the set of china we got for our wedding, the crocheted curtains my own hands had woven during a long winter. These weren't just things. They were fragments of my soul, silent witnesses to a story of love and labor. As I was boxing up the picture frames from the mantelpiece, one of them made me stop. It was an old photo, faded by time. Me and Anthony, young, smiling at the camera, our hands dirty with soil, in front of the first cottonwood sapling we planted. I remembered that day as if it were yesterday. Anthony looked at me, his eyes shining with a dream that was almost too big for him. One day, "Helena," he said, his voice full of a contagious certainty, "our grandkids will play in the shade of this tree." The memory hit me with the force of a wave, and the tears I had been holding back finally came, hot and silent. I wasn't just losing a house. I was losing the future we had dreamed of together. On Wednesday, as I sat in the kitchen surrounded by cardboard boxes that looked like coffins for my memories, I heard a soft knock on the door. It was Lucy, my neighbor from the next ranch over, a woman with a big heart and a sharp tongue. Her eyes, normally full of cheerful curiosity, were filled with compassion. She came in holding a skillet with a warm loaf of cornbread and hugged me without a word. That hug anchored me, reminded me that there was still kindness in the world, even if my own son had forgotten it. "I saw the trucks. Helena," she said, sitting at the table with me. I didn't want to believe the rumors going around town. She hesitated, picking at a loose thread on her apron. "The mayor's son works at the county clerk's office. He told me, Helena, he said the sale was for a very, very high price. Much more than land usually goes for around here." The information landed on me like a stone. Richard had told me the money would barely cover the apartment and some old debts. He had made me feel like a burden, as if the sale were a necessary sacrifice. The betrayal now had a new face: greed. It wasn't just about getting me out of my home. It was about money, about how much he had lied to me. The image of his wife, Brenda, flashed in my mind, always with her designer clothes, her barely disguised contempt for the simple life out here, her constant complaints about how her parents deserved more. The pressure she put on Richard was palpable. Lucy's cornbread tasted like ash in my mouth. The pain mingled with a cold anger that began to spread through my veins. After Lucy left, promising to come back and help with the move, I tried calling Richard again. The phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. His cowardice was another offense. Late that afternoon, exhausted and heavy-hearted, I went up to the attic, a place I had avoided since Anthony's death. The smell of old wood and dust enveloped me. It was where we kept things that had no place in daily life but were too precious to discard. As I rummaged through an old trunk, my fingers brushed against a smooth, cool surface. I pulled the object out carefully. It was a small, dark wooden box, carved with my husband's initials. A shiver ran down my spine as I remembered his words, spoken with an unusual seriousness years ago when he gave me the box. "Only open this on your darkest day, my love." This, without a shadow of a doubt, was the darkest day of my life. With trembling hands, I held it in my lap, my heart pounding against my ribs. What on earth would Anthony have saved for a moment like this? I sat on the dusty attic floor, the small wooden box resting in my lap like a wounded bird. The brass latch was cold to the touch. For a moment, I hesitated. Opening that box meant admitting that this was, in fact, my darkest day, a truth my heart still refused to fully accept. But the distant sound of an engine starting up outside, a cruel reminder of my impending reality, gave me the push I needed. With a shaky breath, I lifted the small latch. The lid opened with a soft creak, releasing the scent of old paper and the pipe tobacco Anthony used to smoke. My eyes filled with tears. It was as if a piece of him was right there, preserved, waiting for me. Inside, lined with faded red velvet, there were no jewels or sentimental keepsakes. There was a bundle of documents tied with a blue satin ribbon. They were strange papers, unlike anything I had ever seen. There were thick reports, full of tables, charts, and geological symbols that made no sense to me. There were detailed maps of our ranch, but with cross-hatched areas and technical notes in the margins, written with a precision that wasn't Anthony's. They looked official, stamped and signed. Beneath it all was a single letter, carefully folded. The handwriting was unmistakable, strong and slanted to the right, just like his. My hands were shaking so much, the paper whispered between my fingers. "My dearest Helena," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means the day I feared has finally come. Forgive me for not telling you this while I was alive, but I wanted to spare you the worry. I wanted your only inheritance to be the peace of this land, not the burdens it might hide. I always knew our Richard has a good heart, but that the ambition of others could easily lead him astray. He sees the land, but he doesn't see its soul. So, years ago, I took a precaution. My heart hammered against my ribs. Each of Anthony's words a drop of water in a desert. What you hold in your hands is proof that our ranch is twofold. One is the surface, the land we love and farm. The other is what lies beneath, a secret the earth keeps. I separated the rights legally. The surface deed, which Richard has unfortunately used, is one thing. But the mineral rights, Helena, they are yours. Yours alone. They are registered in a way that no one can touch without your permission. The legal language was complicated, but the message was clear. Anthony had foreseen this. He had left me a weapon, a defense I never knew I had. The letter continued, instructing me to find a specific type of lawyer, a specialist in mineral law, and gave me the name of an old friend I could trust to guide me. It was a spark of hope, small but incredibly bright, in the middle of the overwhelming darkness. However, as I reread his words, a louder, closer noise tore me from my memories, a high-pitched whine, followed by a metallic thud. I stood up, my legs wobbly, and walked to the small, circular attic window. I wiped the dust from the glass with my sleeve and looked down. What I saw made my blood run cold. One of the new owner's trucks was parked right next to the old cottonwood tree, the sacred place where I scattered Anthony's ashes. Men were unloading heavy equipment, metal pipes, and what looked like a massive drill bit. They were preparing to drill into the ground. There, right there, a cold, visceral panic seized me, stronger than the grief and sadness that had been consuming me. Seeing those men and their machines desecrating the sacred ground where my Anthony rested was the final straw. It was no longer about the house, the land, or the betrayal. It was about the last and deepest connection I had to my husband. I flew down the attic stairs with an agility my knees hadn't felt in years, the wooden box forgotten on the floor. My feet barely touched the steps. I wasn't thinking. I was just feeling, a protective fury, the same I felt when Richard was a little boy and fell in the yard, running to defend him from the world. Now, I ran to defend his father's legacy. I crossed the porch and marched toward the cottonwood tree, the dry earth kicking up dust under my worn shoes. The men stopped what they were doing and looked at me, surprised. The foreman, the same man from the first day, came to meet me, his face etched with an expression of weariness. "Ma'am, please. It's dangerous over here." His voice was calm, but I wasn't there to listen to excuses. "Get this out of here," I said. my voice low but vibrating with an intensity that made him take a step back. "Get all of it out! Now!" I pointed to the gigantic drill that was mere feet from the tree's trunk. "You are not breaking this ground. Not here." He sighed, running a hand over the back of his neck. "Mrs. Sterling, I understand this is difficult, but this is the designated area for the main well. I have my orders. I can't just move the site." "Orders!" I nearly shouted. "My husband's ashes are scattered under this tree. This is more than dirt. It's the memory of a good man. You have no right." My voice broke on the last sentence, and the vulnerability in my tone seemed to hit him harder than any yelling. He looked at the cottonwood, then at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of humanity in his eyes. He spoke in a low voice to his crew. The men looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Finally, he turned back to me. "Look, what I can do is move the drilling about 50 feet to the right for today. But tomorrow, I have to follow the plan. I'm sorry." It was a minimal concession, almost an insult, but it was all I was going to get with pleading. Defeated, I turned and walked back to the house, the sound of equipment being dragged echoing behind me. I sat down again at the kitchen table, my body shaking with rage and helplessness. Yelling and begging wouldn't work. I needed more. The image of the wooden box flashed in my mind. I went back up to the attic, this time with a purpose. I took Anthony's letter and read it again, focusing on the name he had left. Arthur Finch, attorney at law, specializing in mineral rights. I found a phone number for an office in the state capitol. With my heart in my throat, I dialed the numbers on the old rotary phone, the sound of each spin heightening my anxiety. A young, efficient voice answered. "Finch and Associates. Good morning." I stammered as I explained who I was and that I needed to speak with Mr. Finch. The secretary, with cool politeness, informed me that his schedule was booked for weeks. Desperation gave me courage. "Please," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Tell him it's about Anthony Sterling's ranch. Tell him it's an urgent matter, left by Anthony himself." There was a pause on the line. "I'll see what I can do," she said, making no promises. I hung up, feeling a tiny, fragile spark of hope. It was a thin thread, but it was all I had. Minutes later, the phone rang, shrill in the silent house. My heart leaped. Could it be him? I answered with anxious haste. "Hello." But the voice that replied was not a lawyer's. It was the cold, sharp voice of Richard. "Mom, what are you doing? The foreman just called me. Said you're disrupting their work, making a scene. You need to stop this right now." Richard's voice, devoid of any empathy, was like a bucket of ice water. The small flame of hope Anthony's letter had lit flickered under the cold draft of his indifference. "Their scene, Richard," I replied, my voice trembling with contained anger. "They were about to drill into the ground where your father's ashes are scattered. Does that mean nothing to you?" On the other end of the line, I heard an impatient sigh, the same sound he used to make as a teenager when I reprimanded him. "Mom, don't be so dramatic. It's just dirt. Dad is gone. You need to think about the future, about what's practical. I got you a safe place in town. You won't have to worry about the upkeep of this place anymore." Every word was a stab. "Practical," I repeated, incredulous. "You sold 40 years of our life. You lied about the price, and you call that practical? You gave me until Friday, Richard." "Friday, like an executioner setting a date." The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear Brenda's voice in the background, an irritated murmur, and then Richard speaking more quietly, probably moving away. When he came back, his voice was harder, as if he were reading from a script written by someone else. "Look, it was a great deal. The company that bought it is going to modernize production in the region, create jobs. This is bigger than our memories. And the money was fair. Don't believe gossip from the neighbors." The blatant denial about the sale price left me breathless. The betrayal was complete. a chasm opening between us, perhaps too wide to ever be crossed again. "I don't want to talk about this anymore, Richard," I said, my voice now exhausted, devoid of emotion. "Just leave me in peace for my last few days here." I hung up before he could reply. The conversation drained me of all energy. The rest of the day I spent in a stupor, mechanically packing my few possessions, the distant sound of drilling a macabre soundtrack to my farewell. Night came but brought no relief. Sleep escaped me. I tossed and turned, the conversation with Richard replaying in my mind, each of his words sinking in the certainty that I had lost not only my home, but my son as well. In the early hours of the morning, I gave up trying to sleep. I made some tea and went out to the porch, wrapping myself in a shawl against the chill. The full moon bathed the ranch in a silvery light, making the shadows of the trees seem longer and more mysterious. It was then that I saw something strange. Lights. Not the lights from the neighboring ranch, but flashlight beams moving near the area where the men had been drilling during the day. My heart quickened. Were they thieves? But what could they possibly steal from a construction site in the middle of nowhere? Curiosity, stronger than fear, spurred me to act. I silently slipped on my boots and went out the back door, using the shadows of the trees for cover. I approached carefully, my heart hammering against my ribs. I managed to get close enough to hide behind a large sagebrush, where I could see and hear without being noticed. There were 3 men. 2 of them I recognized from the drilling crew. The third, however, wore an expensive suit, completely out of place on the ranch, and was speaking into his phone in a low, urgent voice. He seemed to be the boss, the real owner. No, you don't understand," he was saying into the phone, his voice tense. The initial drill hit an anomalous rock formation. The preliminary geologist is excited. "Cancel the fertilizer order. I think we've found something a lot more interesting than alfalfa here." The man in the suit hung up and turned to the other 2, who were looking at him expectantly. He took a small canvas bag, opened it, and poured a handful of gravel into his palm, illuminating it with his flashlight. The small stones glittered with an unusual intensity under the artificial light, with metallic veins that shimmered strangely. I didn't understand what it was, but the expression on the man's face was one of pure, greedy euphoria. They weren't just looking for water. There was something else there. Something they had found by accident. Something that Anthony, somehow, already knew was there. And my son, in his rush to get rid of the unproductive land, had delivered it all right into their hands. Thursday, my last full day on the ranch, dawned gray and oppressive. The air felt heavier, charged with the tension of what I had witnessed the night before. The behavior of the men on the property had changed drastically. They were no longer workers preparing the land for planting. They now moved with a furtive urgency, like guards protecting a secret. Larger, canvas-covered trucks had arrived before sunrise, and the drilling area was cordoned off with yellow tape. They weren't looking for water anymore. They were protecting a treasure. The feeling of being an intruder in my own home was now overwhelming. Every glance I received from the workers was suspicious, as if I were a spy who knew too much. And in a way, I carried Anthony's secret, a ticking time bomb I had no idea how to detonate. The morning dragged on, each minute a torturous reminder that my time there was running out. I had packed almost everything. The house was hollow, stripped of its soul, echoing the emptiness inside me. It was then that the phone rang, the sound so startling, I knocked a glass of water over on the table. I answered, expecting it to be Richard with more orders, or Brenda with some veiled insult. But the voice on the other end was professional and calm. "Mrs. Helena Sterling, this is Finch and Associates. Mr. Finch apologizes for the delay. He's had a cancellation and could see you today at 2 p.m. Would you be able to come to the city?" My heart stopped and then raced. Yes, of course, I would. It was my only chance. I called Lucy, my voice a mixture of panic and pleading. Without hesitation, she said her son, John, would drive me. An hour later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of John's truck, holding Anthony's wooden box in my lap as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The drive to the city was a blur of landscapes I barely registered. The soft green of the fields gave way to the hard gray of buildings, and the silence of the ranch was replaced by the cacophony of traffic. Mr. Finch's office was in a glass skyscraper that seemed to touch the sky. I felt small and out of place in my simple clothes and my calloused hands. Mr. Finch was an older man, with white hair and kind but piercing eyes. He greeted me with respectful formality, offered me water, and listened patiently as I, my voice cracking, told him the whole story, from the arrival of the trucks to what I had seen the night before. Finally, I slid the wooden box across his polished desk. He opened it carefully. First, he read Anthony's letter, and his face softened into an expression of sad recognition. Anthony was a man ahead of his time, he murmured. Then he picked up the technical documents. His eyes, previously just kind, became sharp, focused. He spread the maps across his desk, analyzed the geological reports, and picked up a magnifying glass to examine the details. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rustling of paper. I held my breath, watching every micro-expression on his face. I saw his eyes widen slightly. I saw his eyebrow arch in surprise. I saw him run a hand over his chin, a gesture of profound disbelief. Time seemed to stand still. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stacked the papers back together, aligning them with methodical precision. He took off his glasses, cleaned them slowly, and looked straight at me. His expression was one of such gravity that a shiver ran down my spine. "Mrs. Sterling," he began, his voice low and laden with a meaning I couldn't yet grasp. "The company that bought your ranch didn't make a good deal. They made the worst deal of their lives." I stared at him, confused, his words echoing in the quiet, elegant office. "The worst deal? What do you mean, sir?" "They've taken everything from me. They paid a fortune, according to my neighbor. How could it be a bad deal?" My mind, mired in pain and loss, couldn't process the logic behind his statement. To me, the company had the power, the land, the future. I only had the ashes of a past life. Mr. Finch leaned forward, his eyes fixed on mine, exuding a calm that contrasted with the storm inside me. "Mrs. Taurus Sterling, please, try to follow me. Imagine your ranch is a 2-layer cake. Richard sold the top layer, the sponge, the frosting. He sold the surface. The agribusiness company bought that layer, thinking it was the whole cake. But they didn't know, and apparently your son didn't either, that your husband had saved the bottom layer, the richest and most valuable filling, just for you." He paused, letting the analogy sink in. "Anthony was a brilliant man. Many years ago, he suspected the potential of the soil in this region. He hired, on his own and in secret, geological surveys. These papers," he tapped the stack of documents lightly, "are the results. They confirm that your property sits on one of the largest and purest deposits of niobium in the country." Niobium. The word was foreign in my mouth, an alien sound that didn't belong to my vocabulary of planting, harvesting, and seasons. "Niobium?" I asked, my voice a thread. Mr. Finch smiled patiently. "It's an extremely valuable mineral, Mrs. Sterling, used in high-end technology, in rockets, in superconductors. It's one of the most strategic metals in the world. What Anthony did was an act of genius and protection. He went to the Mineral Rights Registry and severed the estate. He registered the rights to exploit the subsoil entirely in your name. Legally, the company that bought the ranch owns maybe 3 feet of dirt downwards. Everything below that belongs to you." My head was spinning. The traffic noise from outside seemed distant, muffled. The real world, the world of my pain, of the forced move, of the small apartment in town, suddenly felt like a nightmare I might wake up from. But the reality he was presenting was even more unbelievable. What does that mean, practically? I stammered. It means, he said, his tone now carrying a monumental weight, that the company cannot drive a deeper stake, cannot drill a well, cannot build a foundation without your express permission. They bought an empty shell, and from the accidental drilling you witnessed, they now know what's down there. They've found the treasure, but the key to the vault is in your pocket. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Anthony didn't just protect you. He gave you absolute power. The value of these mineral rights, Mrs. Twyke Sterling. We are talking about something that, by a conservative estimate, could be worth hundreds of millions. Hundreds of millions. The number was so abstract it triggered no emotion. It was just a sound. I couldn't connect that word to my life, to the land I knew, to the pain of betrayal. It was like hearing a story about someone else. But then, Mr. Finch turned back to me, his expression now serious, almost grim. And that is why, Mrs. Sterling, your suffering is far from over. In fact, the real battle begins now. They know what they've found, and they will come after you with everything they have. Sir Finch's words, the real battle begins now. Hung in the office's air-conditioned chill, colder and more frightening than any threat I could have imagined. My brain, accustomed to worrying about drought, the health of the cattle, and the price of feed, simply couldn't encompass the scale of what he was telling me. Hundreds of millions, niobium, mineral rights. These were concepts from another universe, a world of men in suits and glass skyscrapers. Not mine, the only palpable reality, the only one that made my stomach clench in a knot of panic, was that I had less than 24 hours to abandon the only home I had ever known. What good was owning a buried treasure if I couldn't even sleep under my own roof? Mr. Finch seemed to read my anguish. Mrs. Fonda Sterling, he said, his voice firm but gentle, pulling me from my stupor. The first and most important rule is, you do not talk to anyone. You do not sign anything. You do not promise anything. If anyone from the company approaches you, the only thing you will say is, please contact my attorney, Arthur Finch, and you will give them this card. He handed me a small, thick rectangle of paper with his name and number. They will try everything. They will offer you peanuts. They will try to intimidate you. They will say you don't understand the business. You don't have to understand. I do. And Anthony trusted me. The drive back to the ranch was silent. John, Lucy's son, must have seen the storm on my face and wisely asked no questions. I stared out the truck window at the fields and trees I knew by heart, and I saw everything differently. The land was no longer just the cradle of our livelihood. It was a vault. Every hill, every creek, every rocky outcrop seemed to hide that shimmering secret. Anthony's box, now back in my lap, felt like it weighed a ton. It no longer held just papers and a love letter. It held power, a power that terrified me. When I got home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A melancholic farewell. The empty house, with its boxes piled like monuments to my defeat, was a desolate sight. The contrast between the disarray of my life and the unimaginable fortune beneath my feet was so absurd, it brought a bitter, joyless laugh to my lips. I sat at the kitchen table, exhausted to my soul. I should have been making dinner, finishing packing my last few things, preparing for the humiliation of the next morning. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped between the reality of eviction and the fantasy of millions. That's when the phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the silence, making my heart jump. My first thought was, Richard. But when I answered, the voice on the other end was not his. It was a smooth, polished male voice, slick as oil. "Mrs. Helena Sterling? Good evening. My name is Mark Adler. I'm calling on behalf of Terra Nova Agribusiness." I remained silent, Mr. Finch's card feeling like it was burning in my hand. "I apologize for the late hour," he continued, with a calculated sympathy. "But we've learned there was a small bureaucratic snag with the property's records. A formality, really. We'd like to resolve this as amicably as possible. I could stop by tomorrow morning, so we can sign a small addendum to the contract. We'll bring a very generous compensation for your time and trouble." The battle had begun. They were coming tomorrow, on the very day I was supposed to leave forever, bringing their pens and their poisonous promises. Friday arrived not with sunlight, but with a fine, persistent drizzle that turned the outside world into a blur of gray and green. It was the day of my exile, the deadline. Every drop of rain that trickled down the window pane felt like a tear for the end of my life as I had known it. The moving truck Richard had arranged would arrive at noon. Until then, I was in limbo, a prisoner awaiting transfer. My breakfast tasted like sand. I walked through the hollow house, my breath echoing off the bare walls. The only thing that gave me a sliver of strength was Mr. Finch's card, which I had placed in the pocket of my dress. I touched it every so often, the thick, smooth paper, a tactile anchor in the storm of fear that assailed me. Around 10 o'clock, a sleek black car, as out of place on that dirt road as a penguin in the desert, pulled up in front of my house. Mud splattered its immaculate bodywork as it stopped. A man in a gray suit with shiny shoes got out, opening an umbrella with a swift, efficient gesture. It was Mark Adler, the oily voice from the phone now given a body. He was younger than I'd imagined, with a smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Mrs. Sterling, a pleasure," he said, extending a hand that I did not take. "I'm here as we discussed. We can resolve this in 5 minutes, and you can get on with your move in peace." He walked in uninvited, his gaze sweeping over the stacked boxes with a faint disdain. He opened a leather briefcase on the kitchen table, the only piece of furniture not yet covered by a sheet. "It's very simple," he began, in the tone of someone explaining something to a child. "There was a small flaw in the original filing, a technicality. This document here simply consolidates all property rights under Terra Nova's name. A mere formality to get everything in order." He pushed the paper and a pen toward me. Next to it, he placed a check. The amount was high, enough to buy several apartments like the one Richard had assigned to me. But I knew, thanks to Mr. Finch, that it was the equivalent of offering a handful of glass beads for a gold mine. I took a deep breath, the smell of rain and wet earth giving me courage. I touched the card in my pocket. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Mrs. Sterling, perhaps I haven't made myself clear. This is a very generous compensation for a minor inconvenience." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, "and the only thing I have to say is, please contact my attorney." I handed him Mr. Finch's card. He took the card, glanced at the name, and his entire demeanor changed. The mask of friendliness fell away, revealing a hard, cold impatience. "Arthur Finch," he scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. "You are being very poorly advised. Involving lawyers will only complicate and drag out a simple process. Litigation can take years, be very expensive and stressful, especially for a woman of your age and in your position." The threat was clear, veiled in false concern. I felt my stomach turn to ice, but I held my ground. It was at that exact moment that the kitchen door opened, and Lucy walked in, bringing the smell of firewood and fresh coffee with her. She carried a thermos and 2 mugs. "Came to keep you company on this sad morning. Helena," she said, before noticing the man in the suit. She sized him up from head to toe, not bothering to hide her disapproval. Did I miss something? Her presence, solid and unshakable, gave me new resolve. This gentleman was just leaving, I replied, looking directly at Mr. Adler. Frustrated and clearly unnerved by the unexpected witness, the lawyer packed away his papers with sharp, angry movements. "This is a big mistake, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice low and hissing. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. Terra Nova doesn't usually take no for an answer." He turned and left, slamming the door behind him, leaving behind a heavy silence and the promise of a war that was just beginning. Mr. Adler's departure left a tense vacuum in the kitchen, like the silence that follows a clap of thunder. Lucy placed the thermos on the table, the soft sound of porcelain on wood, a comforting counterpoint to the hostility that had just stormed out. Her small, shrewd eyes were fixed on me, full of a question she didn't dare ask aloud. I collapsed into a chair, my body finally giving in to the adrenaline of the confrontation. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. "He wanted me to sign some papers," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "He offered money." Lucy poured the coffee in silence, pushing one of the steaming mugs toward me. "And you didn't sign," she stated, not asked. "That man didn't have the face of someone bringing good news." The warmth of the mug in my hands calmed me slightly. I looked at my friend's kind, wrinkled face, and for the first time since my world had turned upside down, I felt I wasn't completely alone. I made a decision. I had to trust someone, and there was no soul more trustworthy in this county than Lucy. In a halting voice, I told her everything about Anthony's box, the letter, the niobium, the visit with Mr. Finch, the fortune buried beneath our feet. Lucy listened without interrupting, her eyes widening with each revelation. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, just looking at me. I expected shock, perhaps even disbelief. Instead, she let out a loud, hearty laugh, a sound so unexpected it made me jump in my chair. "Anthony!" she exclaimed, slapping the table with her palm. "That old fox! I always knew he was smarter than all of us put together. So that's why those vultures in suits are circling your land." Her reaction, so full of life and an almost gleeful admiration for my late husband's cunning, was like a balm. The weight on my shoulders seemed to lighten. The arrival of the moving truck, promptly at noon, brought reality crashing back with a dull thud. Two strong, silent men began carrying out the boxes, methodically and impersonally, emptying the house. Every piece of furniture that went out the door felt like a piece of me was being torn away. Lucy stayed by my side the entire time, her quiet presence giving me the strength not to fall apart. When the truck was almost full, another car pulled up the dirt road. This time, it was Richard's. My heart sank. He got out, his face a mask of irritation. Brenda was beside him, looking even angrier. "Mom, what did you do?" he said, his voice loud, not even greeting me. "Mr. Adler called me. He said you refused to cooperate, that you hired a lawyer. What is this? Are you trying to sabotage everything?" Brenda cut him off, her voice thin and sharp as broken glass. "I don't believe this. After everything we did for you, finding you a decent place in town, getting you out of this backwater, this is how you thank us, by making trouble?" Her parents watched the scene from inside their car, their expressions contemptuous. The pressure on him was visible, palpable. He was being crushed between his new family's greed and his loyalty to the old. "I'm not making trouble, Richard," I answered, my voice tired. "I'm just protecting what's mine, what your father left for me." He laughed, a harsh sound. "What Dad left you? He left you a pile of old land and debt. I was the one who fixed everything. You should be thanking me." The injustice of his words hit me hard. He had no idea. He didn't know about the secret, his father's foresight, the fortune he had discarded for a handful of coins. Before I could respond, Mr. Finch, whom I had called earlier to warn about Mr. Adler's visit, arrived in his own car, parking right behind Richard's. His arrival completely changed the dynamic of the situation. He got out of the car, calm and authority emanating from him like an aura. "Richard Sterling?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "My name is Arthur Finch. I'm your mother's attorney, and I believe we need to have a very serious conversation about the illegal sale of assets that did not belong to you." Mr. Finch's arrival was like the sudden appearance of a judge in the middle of a street brawl. The air turned electric. Richard, caught off guard, looked from the lawyer to me, confusion and anger warring on his face. Brenda crossed her arms, her chin high in a gesture of defiance, though a flicker of uncertainty had appeared in her eyes. "Illegal sale? What are you talking about?" Richard retorted, trying to maintain a posture of outrage, but his voice faltered. "The ranch belonged to my father. I'm the sole heir. The sale was perfectly legal. Mr. Finch walked slowly until he stood between my son and me, creating a protective barrier. He didn't raise his voice. His calm was his most potent weapon. "You sold the surface rights to the property, Mr. Sterling. What you may not have known is that the mineral rights, which happen to constitute the vast majority of this land's value, were legally registered in the exclusive name of your mother, Helena Sterling, over a decade ago." He paused, letting the weight of the information sink in. "Selling something that does not belong to you, thereby misleading the buyer, is a very serious matter. In fact, it's considered fraud." Fraud. The word landed like an anvil in the middle of the muddy yard. Brenda took a step back, the color draining from her face. Richard stared at me, his eyes wide, an expression of pure disbelief forming. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was beginning to understand the scale of the abyss he had walked into. That's ridiculous," he finally managed, but the conviction was gone. "Mineral rights? What nonsense is that? It's just land." "It's not nonsense, Mr. Sterling," Mr. Finch continued, relentless. "It's niobium, a mineral deposit of extraordinary value, which the purchasing company, Terra Nova Agribusiness, discovered accidentally while drilling a well. A treasure that you gave away, but which legally was never yours to give." The mention of a treasure made Brenda's parents, who had been observing from a distance, draw closer, curiosity and greed written on their faces. Richard's humiliation was now public, witnessed by the family he was trying so desperately to impress. He looked at the ground, at the house, at the moving truck, as if seeing it all for the first time. The reality of his catastrophic business decision materializing before his eyes. The moving truck, now fully loaded, was idling, awaiting orders. The two movers watched the scene with thinly veiled interest. Ayair, who should have been the central figure in this drama, felt strangely detached, like a spectator. Seeing Richard's arrogance disintegrate brought me no satisfaction, just a deep, hollow sadness. What happens now?" Richard asked, his voice barely audible, directed at the lawyer. "Now," Mr. Finch said, his tone practical. "Terra Nova has a gigantic problem. They bought a property they cannot use for its intended purpose, and they will sue you for fraud and damages, demanding back every cent they paid, plus a multi-million-dollar settlement. Unless, of course, they can negotiate the rights with the actual owner." All eyes turned to me, the old woman who was being evicted, the senile woman who needed to be taken care of. Suddenly, I was the most powerful person there. The irony was so thick I could almost touch it. Brenda, sensing the shift in power, took a step toward me, a clumsy attempt at a smile on her face. "Mom," she began, her voice syrupy. "We didn't know. Richard only wanted what was best for you. We can sort this out as a family, can't we?" The attempted manipulation was so transparent it filled me with a cold disgust. Just then, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. Hesitant, a professional and slightly nervous female voice introduced herself as the personal assistant to the CEO of Terra Nova Agribusiness. She said her boss would like to schedule an urgent meeting with me and my legal counsel as soon as possible to discuss a mutually beneficial partnership. The war had changed tactics. Intimidation had failed. Now, they would come with pleas and offers. I hung up the phone and looked at the moving truck. "You can unload everything," I said, my voice clear and firm, echoing in the stunned silence of everyone present. "I'm not going anywhere." The order to unload the truck was the turning point, the moment the tide visibly and irrevocably turned. The movers, confused, glanced at Richard for confirmation. My son, pale and defeated, just nodded, unable to meet my eyes, as the first piece of furniture, my old reading armchair, was carried back into the house. An awkward silence fell over the group. Brenda's family, realizing the show was over, and they were on the losing side, retreated to their car and left without a word. Brenda shot one last look at Richard, a mixture of fury and contempt, before following her parents. The alliance built on the fragile foundation of greed had shattered at the first sign of trouble. Richard was left behind, alone, a pathetic figure amidst the wreckage of his ambitions. He approached me, his arrogance replaced by a childlike desperation. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered, the words lost in the drizzle that had started again. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I was an idiot. I ruined everything." The tears streaming down his face were genuine. They were tears of fear, humiliation, and regret. But looking at him, I didn't feel the maternal compassion I expected. I felt a cold emptiness. The unconditional love I'd always had for him had been wounded, perhaps mortally. "You didn't ruin everything, Richard," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You sold an empire your parents built with sweat and sacrifice for a beach house. It was just a very bad business decision." My coldness seemed to hit him harder than any shouting or accusation. He recoiled as if I had slapped him. Mr. Finch, sensing the tension, intervened with his usual calm. "Richard, I suggest you find a good lawyer. You're going to need one. Now, if you'll excuse us, your mother and I have a great deal to discuss." Without another word, Richard turned and walked to his car, his body slumped under the weight of his failure. Watching him leave brought me no joy, only the painful confirmation of the deep wound between us. In the weeks that followed, my life transformed into a whirlwind. The ranch, once a haven of peace, became an operations hub. Mr. Finch set up a temporary office in my dining room. Geologists, mining engineers, financial consultants, and tax attorneys came and went, bringing with them the scent of the city and the jargon of a world I barely understood. The geological assessments confirmed the initial suspicions, and the numbers whispered in my meetings were so astronomical they seemed fictional. I had gone from an evicted widow to the chairwoman of a multi-billion-dollar fortune. Terra Nova Agribusiness, desperate, made escalating offers, first to buy the rights, then to form a partnership, then to pay me exorbitant royalties. On Mr. Finch's advice, I refused them all. Anthony hadn't left me this legacy so I could hand it over to the same vultures who tried to devour me. We would create our own company to manage the extraction, ensuring the wealth benefited the local community, with schools, hospitals, and jobs. I was learning to wield the power Anthony had given me. Amidst all this, I received news that Terra Nova was suing Richard, just as Mr. Finch had predicted. They blamed him for the fraudulent sale and demanded damages that would lead him to complete bankruptcy. Shortly after, I learned that his in-laws, Beach House, the trophy that had cost him his family's inheritance, had been seized to cover the initial legal fees. The dream of social climbing had become a nightmare of financial ruin. The climax of this whole reversal happened on a rainy afternoon, about a month after the day I was almost thrown out. I was in a luxury hotel in the state capital, finishing a meeting with a group of international investors interested in financing our mining project. I was surrounded by executives in expensive suits, all treating me with a respect and deference I had never known. That's when I saw him. Richard was standing at the entrance to the conference room, soaked from the rain, his face haggard, looking much older. He looked at me, the woman he had discarded, now at the center of a universe of power and wealth. He crossed the room, the curious gazes of the executives following him, and fell to his knees before me. "Mom, forgive me. I didn't know. I was such an idiot," he sobbed, tears mixing with the raindrops on his face. "For God's sake, help me. I'm going to lose everything. They're going to take everything from me." The room fell into a sepulchral silence. All eyes were on me, awaiting my reaction. I looked down at my son, broken and humiliated, and felt an overwhelming mix of pain, pity, and a bitter, belated justice. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of all my suffering. What would I do now? The sound of Richard's desperate sobs echoed through the luxury ballroom, a raw, painful noise in an environment of polish and power. The executives, men and women accustomed to multi-million-dollar negotiations, stared at me, their faces blank canvases of professional curiosity. They didn't see a mother before her broken son. They saw an adversary being tested, an enigma to be solved. In that instant, I felt the weight of 40 years of love and 1 month of betrayal collide within my chest. A part of me, the mother who had rocked him to sleep, wanted to kneel with him, to hold him, and tell him everything would be all right. But the other part, the woman Anthony had protected and who had learned to fight, knew that kindness is sometimes telling the hardest truth. I took a deep breath, feeling the strength of the earth beneath my feet, even 20 stories up. "Get up, Richard," I said, my voice calm, but with a thread of steel that surprised even me. "Don't humiliate yourself further. Not here." He looked up at me, his eyes red and pleading, waiting for a word of comfort, a promise of salvation. I didn't offer one. "Your choices brought you here," I continued, my voice cutting through the silence. "Every decision you made, every lie you told, every piece of trust you shattered, what you are reaping now, you sowed yourself. This isn't about me or the money. It's about the consequences of your actions." With discreet help from Mr. Finch, who approached and placed a firm hand on his shoulder, Richard staggered to his feet. He said nothing more. The look of understanding, that there would be no easy rescue, that forgiveness was not a business transaction, drained him of any remaining fight. He turned and left the room, a shrunken figure, leaving a profound silence in his wake. The meeting was politely concluded soon after. No one mentioned the incident, but the respect in their eyes had deepened. They now knew I wasn't just wealthy. I was strong. On the way back to the ranch, Mr. Finch informed me of the final resolution. Terra Nova, facing a devastating lawsuit and a public relations nightmare, had capitulated. They sold the surface rights of the property back to me for a fraction of what they paid, in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and the withdrawal of all legal action. The ranch was mine again, whole, from the highest leaf on the tree to the deepest mineral in the rock. The legal victory, however, had a bittersweet taste. That night, for the first time in a month, I lay in my own bed, in my own room. The house was no longer empty, but filled with my furniture, my scents, my memories. But something had changed forever. I had my home back, but the peace it once represented was stained. Forgiveness, I was discovering, was not a light switch. It was a long and rocky path, and I had barely taken the first step. In the days that followed, I threw myself into work. I established the Helena Sterling Agricultural and Mineral Foundation, a project to ensure the wealth from the land was reinvested in the community. I started to feel at home in this new role, the matriarch not just of a family, but of a legacy. A week later, Mr. Finch visited me at the ranch. He brought a briefcase full of operational documents for me to sign. As I leafed through the papers, one of them stood out. It was an application for a junior logistics assistant position in the mining operation. The headshot in the top right corner was of Richard, his face thinner, his eyes devoid of any spark. Mr. Finch cleared his throat. He applied through the standard job portal. No one in HR knows who he is. The decision is yours, Mrs. Sterling. What should I do with this? I held the paper, my only son's future in my hands. I held that piece of paper in my hand for a long time, my son's face staring up at me from a poorly lit, joyless ID photo. This wasn't the junior executive trying to impress his wife's family, nor the arrogant son who had sentenced me to exile. This was just a man who had lost everything. I could have torn that paper up and thrown it away. It would have been the end of a painful story, a complete revenge. But as I looked out my kitchen window at the old cottonwood tree swaying gently in the wind, I knew it wasn't what Anthony would have wanted. He didn't leave me a fortune to use as a weapon against our own son. He left it to protect me, to ensure our legacy would continue. And a legacy, I had learned in that turbulent month, is not just made of land and money, but also of grace and the chance for redemption. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Finch. "Accept the application," I said, my voice firm. "He'll start at the lowest level, with no privileges. His salary will be standard, and his responsibilities will be the same as any other employee. He will report to a supervisor, and I am not to be informed of his progress unless he violates company policy." Mr. Finch was silent for a moment. "That is a very generous decision, Mrs. Sterling," he finally said. "It's not generosity, Arthur," I replied. "It's an education. He's going to learn, the hard way, the value of every shovelful of dirt, of every hour of honest work. He's going to learn, day by day, the true worth of what he almost destroyed out of greed and callousness." And so it was. Today, a month after being thrown out of my own home, I walk the fields that are mine once more. The ranch is the same, but everything is different. The air seems cleaner, the green more vibrant. The land, which has always been my confidant, now whispers not just stories of the past, but promises of a prosperous future, a future that will help lift up our community. Sometimes, from a distance, I see Richard. He wears the company uniform, the yellow hard hat. He carries equipment, checks spreadsheets, talks with the other workers who have no idea he is the son of the woman who owns it all. It is a painful but necessary irony. He is rebuilding his life from the dust he himself created. Whether he will one day find his way back to my heart, only time will tell. Forgiveness is still a small seed, one that needs a great deal of sun and rain to sprout. Today, I sat once again under the old cottonwood tree, Anthony's resting place. I closed my eyes and felt the warmth of the sun on my face. The sweetest revenge wasn't watching my son lose everything, nor was it becoming one of the wealthiest women in the state. The sweetest revenge, the truest victory, was discovering that my husband's love was a fortress so well built that it protected me even